Sure.
Here, well, we'll do this. I'll do a quick intro, and then I'll say, and we're joined by the co-hosts of the Next Session podcast. And if you want to hit the magic button at that point, I think that would be great.
Okay.
The fairy dust button.
Fairy dust standing by.
Yeah. All right. Cool. We're all right. Hold on. Let me put on my podcast face.
Oh yeah, podcast face.
Yeah, it's very important that the people see your podcast face.
Lemon face, podcast face, lemon face.
Yeah,
There you go. There you go. Sweet.
All right, I'm gonna imitate Robert Evans a little bit. Oh, what's up, buddy? Welcome back to Where We Roll, the tabletop role-playing game chat show. I'm your co-host, Chris Pickett, and I am joined, as always, the lovely friend and co-host, Marshall.
Hey, it's me, Wythe Marschall.
It sure is. And today on Why We Roll, we are joined by the co-hosts of the Next Session podcast, Adam and Alyssa Johns.
Hey.
Hello. So glad to be here.
Oh my God, you just appeared magically in the studio.
It's a cool leveled up thing that we have. It's actually, I leveled up my hoodie until it got into magical appearance level.
Sprinkle it with fairy dust, and now we can fly.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's pretty incredible. Yeah. Well, maybe today we can get into some tips and tricks for people who want to learn how to magically transport themselves. I think there's blink spells. I don't know. I don't remember Dungeons and Dragons stuff, but
yeah, absolutely
options. Great. Well, so anyway, for those who don't know, who haven't listened, Adam, Alyssa, can you introduce yourselves? Can you introduce the Next Session podcast for us?
Absolutely. So I'm Adam Johns.
And I'm Alyssa Johns.
So the Next Session podcast is a podcast dedicated to providing sort of advice level help for game masters and sometimes players who are preparing for their next session of play. So most of the time it's somebody who sends in, a message or a player who shoots us an email or something, and we answer those questions on air, going over like, here's the best ways to deal with that. Oftentimes it's like challenges related to, I'm having a challenge in my plot at the table, or a player that I'm struggling to figure out how to work with, or a rules interpretation, something along those lines.
Yeah, we sort of do candid brainstorming between the two of us, and we're married. We're not brother sister.
Yeah.
Just thought I'd clarify that.
That is good to clarify.
Just saying.
I didn't think of that.
And so we have a couple of segments. So we do the next session, which is usually questions helping you with your next session. We have Ask a GM, which is more technical questions. So like, hey, I have this rogue and he took this feat and now he wants to do this. Does that work together? Does that not work together? And mostly Adam answers those. And then we have we talk about like a spell or a magic item that just kind of fill out and help people out with maybe a spell they haven't used before. Or sometimes we do D&D advice. It tends to be D&D, but tabletop role-playing game advice that people out there have used. And we kind of go, is this good advice or does this suck? And then, and that's it. That's the podcast in a nutshell.
Nice.
Come listen.
Yeah, no, definitely. People should check it out. It's really good. And I like the breaking up into different sort of genres of advice. And also drawing on, this will be something we can get into, but kind of therapy in the role that games can play outside of fun having, but always including fun having, which is something that on the show we're really excited about. Yeah. So I think like advice and how to use games to have fun and what fun means for different groups is such a nice, capacious kind of philosophical blob of kind of what is it that Chris and I have gotten into a lot of different ways with different creators who have sometimes different views, but often it's just, different dimensions, right? Different segments that they're really focused on. So it's cool to meet a fellow kind of meta podcast duo.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I do. Hashtag not actual play, because half the time people go, or are you actual play? And I go, no actual play here.
No. Although we've done some of that. I mean, I've done a couple of actual play things in the past.
I guess technically I was on an actual play
live
stream once, twice, once. It was fun. I won.
Yeah. Yeah, and you won. You won the RPG.
It was a competition.
It was a kaiju monster battle, and I drew a lich at random, and somehow I won. So you
right.
should go back and find that. That was
Well,
fun.
I mean, that's kind of like we recently spoke with friend of the podcast, so other RPG podcaster person, Eric Silver, released a game called Model Our Nations, which is role playing game, but it does have like a points system, so it's not not out of the realm of possibility to win an RPG.
Right.
Hidden that really interesting in between space. For like what people usually picture when they think about RPGs and kind of the more board game oriented kind of concepts in it. That's cool. I like that.
Well, that's funny to think, because that's something we've brought up before. Like, if you play a classic Dragon game, even though it's an unwinnable infinite game, it's usually played, especially by new players, as a finite game you can win, i.e. get to 20th level with all the gold and all the loot and +5 swords and such, and then retire or whatever, right? Have a domain. Whereas, the modern concept, the sort of NSR idea of like modeling, simulating some kind of interesting, avatar, someone that you are not probably, whether it's an elf or a sci-fi person or whatever, and then like learning about that world and exploring, like that is more of a true infinite game. But it's true. Eric made a game about sort of model UN, and so tried to backport, like, okay, somebody gets their agenda passed and somebody doesn't at the end of the day, right? Like, there are material effects here. So it was an interesting concept for me to be told I'd won an RPG, because I don't think that had ever happened. I never thought. I've always been so against, like, oh, you can't really win. It's storytelling. It's all Coen Brothers. It's all shitbaggery all the way down, right? You're all going to die horribly somehow. You're all Picaros. But in this case, it was like,
that's how it all ends.
No, we won. This is. So we can get into game, because you've also designed at least one game, right? So there, you have a sort of mixed background across GMing, hosting a podcast about GMing, designing at least a game. I think working on some other projects. So it'll be interesting to kind of hear how you bring that together in the advice space, and how GMs kind of react to what you're offering, and how you've evolved. Because I think it's interesting how the industry's evolved, and I think one way to track that is game design, which we usually talk about, also AP and the evolution of an explosion of AP. But this is kind of the third category for us, Chris, which is what we're doing. This kind of meta category of people thinking about games and having discussions about the growth of especially indie RPGs specifically.
Thinking of it as a discrete medium kind of unto itself as well, which is always really interesting. Maybe before we jump into all of that, something that we do ask most of our guests, and Adam, can you hit me with a random soundboard button for our next segment? I've decided this is a segment. Here and now.
Wow, really setting expectations.
This one's a little bit.
There we go.
That's more
I love it. Let's fucking go. All right, so this segment is called "How did y'all get into RPGs?" Like, what's your history? What's your background? What led you to creating the Next Session podcast?
Oh yeah, should I start, since I think I go
Yours
back a
is
little
longer.
further?
Do you want me to start because it's shorter?
No, I'll start.
Okay, all right. I'm gonna.
So I started playing RPGs when I was about probably about 10. I had moved from the East Coast. I actually used to live in Pennsylvania, and I moved to Flagstaff, Arizona. And I had a friend that was living down the street, and they were like the first friend that I met, the first person that I met and started building friendships with. And they had the second edition AD&D player's handbook. And we would sit down and go to their house, and we had one tube. You remember when all the dice came in like big long tubes? We had one long tube of dice for all of us. And we would open up the book and we would go through it and look. It was a lot of looking at pictures. Like we could read, and we read through the rules, but we didn't do a lot of following the rules. It was just sort of a vague concept of what the rules were. And we would sit down, and everybody wanted to play a paladin because they were the most powerful class, because they could cast spells and wear heavy armor and be a melee character. And so we were all paladins. No one understood any of the limitations.
Oops, all paladins.
It didn't matter.
Oops, all fascists.
Right. And so we just had a blast. Like, it was just imagination. It was like the purest form of what role-playing games are in my mind, which is just like telling stories and rolling dice and having imagination. And we would rotate around who was the game master, because nobody really wanted to do it. Everybody wanted to be a character. And we just had a blast doing this. And I played for years with the same friend. And then we got into high school and stuff, and they had different interests than I had, and we kind of separated. And then I played off and on through high school and college. And things didn't really start to come back significantly until I was in grad school. I went to grad school for marriage and family therapy. And while I was in grad school, I met another Adam. His name's Adam Davis. And he was running groups for neurodivergent teens where they were playing Dungeons and Dragons as kind of like an after school program. It wasn't really, it was just sort of a social gathering space. But he and I were both in grad school for counseling and for therapy. And actually he was in grad school for education. And he said, do you want to come and work with neurodivergent teens playing D&D? And I was like, yeah. That sounds awesome. And so we started sitting down. He was in drama therapy, and we started realizing that we could do a lot of stuff really intentionally with the game. Designing, as the game master, designing the in-game scenarios and the challenges that the characters are overtaking to actually build real world areas of social growth for the characters, for the players themselves. And so we started doing that, and we would sit down and we would plan out our games with the idea that, like, we're going to challenge some of the things for the player to do through their character, and through that, then they would incorporate those areas of growth and those areas of improvement or self-reflection from that game experience, and then take it into their real life. And we saw it being really powerful. And so eventually we had done a little bit of it at the company we were working at. We decided, we can do a lot more with this. We started our own company as an LLC. We started we're each running 5 groups a week in wholly unique storylines, building on social capacity. And then we said we can't do any more with just us. So then we turned it into a nonprofit, and that nonprofit's called Game to Grow. And then we were both co-executive directors of that nonprofit for about 5 years. We made a game called Critical Core that incorporated all those same concepts to get it out to more people. We wrote a book called Therapeutically Applied. This got it there. Therapeutically Applied Role-Playing Games: The Game to Grow Method. And then I stepped away. Being an executive director was exhausting. So then I went directly into private practice. And somewhere in the middle of that, Alyssa and I started a podcast because we thought it would be super fun to start working on, like, specifically more the game master kind of advice stuff, which is how we got into the Next Session podcast stuff.
Well, really how we got started on the podcast is that the pandemic hit and I lost my job. I worked for the Seattle Children's Theater as the head electrician. So I have a big theater lighting background. And when you do theater and suddenly no one can come to theater, all the theater jobs go away. And especially children's theater, we were adults doing theater for children. So most of our clientele were field trips. And when the vaccine started rolling out, it didn't roll out for kids for a long time. And so not only did I lose my job, but I lost my job for a long time. And so we were at home a lot. We were walking to coffee shops, and Adam was on another podcast as a guest.
I was game mastering the Psychology in Seattle D&D episodes, which are super fun to listen to if you ever get a chance to jump in.
We should pop the link into the show notes, because I think this is this whole thing is fascinating about the uses of RPGs in the social sciences. I'm an anthropologist by trade, so I'm very curious about this. But please, Alyssa, go ahead with the story of Next Session.
So Adam was planning these D&D sessions for Psychology in Seattle, and he was like, "Oh, the next session is going to have this," and he was kind of using me as a sounding board, and we were going back and forth, and we kept cracking all these jokes, and we were cracking ourselves up on it was like a 25-minute walk one way to this coffee shop. So we had a lot of time on our hands, and we were like, maybe we should just record this. This is kind of fun. And maybe people will submit their questions and we can help them out. And it was slow going for a while. So we would pull questions from Reddit or the internet or wherever just to answer something, and had a lot of fun. And it grew from there. And now when we record our podcast, I get the questions, and Adam is not allowed to know the questions because he will just start answering them. And then I'll go save it for the podcast because, like, you're using all your best stuff. Because we'll get to the recording and he'll go, "What was that funny thing I just said?" Yeah,
Alyssa would be like, here's the question we're going to answer in a week. And I'd be like, here's all my answers to that question. And then we get to the recording. She'd be like, what was that? Here's the question. I'd be like, oh, I don't know.
You said something funny.
I already said some good stuff about it.
It's gone out of my brain.
They're gone now.
Yeah.
You got to do the David Lynch thing and capture it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's why he doesn't get to know. Everything's off the cuff for him, and I'm off the cusp for the.
I don't know.
Everything's
Yeah.
Live
Cuff,
for him,
yeah.
and I get to do a little bit more research, which is great because my background in D&D is very, very small compared to Adam's. I remember in middle school, I had a friend. His name was Andrew. I'm not going to out his last name, but his name is Andrew. We went over to his house, and he and his buddies were all around the table with paper and pencil and talking about this great game D&D, and I was not allowed to play. And I, had a typical like, what the hell? And then I was like, D&D's stupid. I don't want to play anyway. Because it was middle school, and so I
Big Gygax intended.
Yes,
that's true.
Yeah.
There's a lot of really unfortunate truth to that.
So I didn't want to play, and like wrote it off and didn't play. And then it wasn't until Adam and I started dating, and he started going to grad school, and you started a game with our friends, and I started playing first time with Adam.
Yeah,
you're my first dungeon master.
That's true.
No.
Yeah, and then I got to DM for a while, which was fun, and and then the pandemic and the podcast, and here we are.
And here we are.
Here we are.
Well, yeah, no, I love that your origin stories reflect the common threads of started playing D&D as a kid or didn't start playing D&D as a kid. I don't know how there would be a third, but so far they sort of cluster in those two.
Yeah, it's either you pick it up pretty early or you come to it at some time in your 20s or late 30s, or like somewhere between like 25 and 35. A lot of people are like, oh, it's okay to be goofy and play in this space.
Or due to the pandemic and the coincidence of the pandemic with the OSR and the kind of transition in the NSR. And so I think that's more where I was going in a non-goofy register. It's like there was a moment of popularity in the 80s, 90s, and then there's this void, and then it kind of comes roaring back.
This resurgence.
Yeah. So it's cool that and then together you have both those perspectives. And yeah, I mean, definitely, I love the idea of saving it for the pod, getting that sprezzatura, the idea of lightness of improv. But the other thing you could do if you wanted, so sort of like the David Lynch thing, but is Prince mic'd his whole house, right? Famously. So always be capturing, always be podcasting. I don't know, the editing would be a nightmare.
Oh my God. I'm the one who edits the podcast and it's hard.
Yeah. Can you imagine the garbage of listening to me talk?
I already have to I hate listening to my own voice. I can't only imagine being like, here I'm doing dishes. Here's the laundry.
Well, you wouldn't even have like your performance or your microphone voice on at that point.
Oh, yeah.
Like you just be yourself.
Yeah.
I love that idea, actually. There's something really weird and what's the word I'm looking for? Foucault, panopticon. There's a very panopticon feel to that, an audio panopticon.
I'm just thinking like Truman Show, like
it's very artistic in its concept there. I like that a lot.
Yeah.
And all you have to do is spend 8 hours a night going through the footage and sort it out.
I think
it's
at
easy.
that point you just release it all. That's the artistry of it, is you just here you go. 8 hours. There you go. Have fun listening to that. It's literally your whole next day.
The Synecdoche, New York thing of like your performance art is just being you, but you're always like you're a podcaster who never stops podcasting ever, except when you're asleep or in a coma.
It's actually super interesting, and it's fun that my little brother actually lives in New York, and he is an artist. He edits art books for art installations that they make, like the art books that you buy at like the
they're like tabletop
at the
art
museum
books.
Or whatever.
Coffee table books.
Yeah.
And he used to own a large installation art project. What is it called?
Gallery.
Gallery. Thank you. Called Signal in the Bronx. Until a couple of years.
I don't know that one.
It feels like I would like suddenly be encroaching on his domain a little bit. I could be getting into the artist's lifestyle.
You're his next project.
Yeah.
It can be collaborative.
Yeah, there you go.
This is reminding me a lot of like before Web 2, like before the 90s web crash, like early streamers where people like I forget the guy's name, but he literally just like put cameras all over his house, and it was just him and his girlfriend living their daily life.
Yeah. Well, John Lennon and
And
Yoko
then-
Ono did that too, back at, and,
Sure,
and Andy
yeah.
Warhol. I mean, there were elements of this, but yeah, I think there's a kind of like you could always also be GMing, and that like it's not about podcasting so much as like having some weird story going on with yourself and with anyone who's around you. And I think
can
that
only
we're
imagine.
seeing-
You'd be
Yeah.
narrating your own life. I'm going and grabbing a bowl for my cereal.
It would be.
Oh,
It would
was
actually be really funny to then go back
And then from
like,
the-
narrate my whole day.
Yeah.
Yeah. Or,
Well, it'd be
or
really
like
funny if, like, Alyssa, you were like, "All right, I'm grabbing a bowl. I moved 10 feet towards the counter to grab a bowl for my cereal," and then in the other room, Adam's like, "Make a dexterity check."
exactly.
Roll for bowl.
It made me think
Yeah,
of,
roll for bowl.
Joel Haver's real life Baldur's Gate, where the guy keeps rolling ones just to like walk outside, like go to work, like show a slideshow to his boss, and he keeps nat oneing, and it's just like fucks up his whole life just because he has a string of stochastic errors. But yeah, I mean,
What would a
Yeah,
one
sorry.
roll on a bowl be? Like
I think you
like
just
like
you-
a
you-
teaspoon.
like I think you like
Oh, right.
roll and you get you're like I got a 1 and I'm like no bowl for you and you're like
Damn it.
like, does anyone
You
watch
direct-
this
you
shit or
direct-
something like that?
You direct her to shatter the bowl on the ground. It's
Yeah.
like, well, you got to break it. What-
Yeah. Sorry.
well, so
Follow
we're
the
already getting into sort of beyond the typical table and into
Yeah,
the
yeah.
therapeutic register. But before we do that, primarily y'all are an advice. I mean, next session is an advice podcast, right?
Yeah.
So maybe we could ask some questions and talk about that too, just to kind of give people a taste and again encourage them to go listen. And if they have questions, and they can also submit questions, which I think is fantastic.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they're
Absolutely.
real questions, right?
Yes.
And maybe actually that's one way to ask about it is like, who are your listeners and what are the kinds of questions you get? You know what I mean? Like generally, and what sorts of advice are
Yeah.
you generally giving us? Because that, RPGs can range, as we're talking about. You can do this kind of weird performative no rules, or, you could do very strict Gygaxian. You're going to go fight a Minotaur. So you got to tell me every time you move a foot in a direction, because there might be a trap. So like
It definitely depends.
Advice? Yeah.
Yeah.
So we get the the nitty gritty, like my character swallowed a water elemental. What is that going to do? From that to we have one of our listeners, the Red Warlock, who he just has a like rolling story that's happening, and every time he messages in with a question for his next session, I'm like, oh, we're going back to his world, and what are we going to do next? And I kind of want him to just like get on the podcast some days and just talk about it, because it just kind of rolls and rolls and rolls.
And we will actually sometimes have some of the listeners come on to the podcast, and then we can have like a whole discussion about what are the challenges that they're facing, what's going
That's
on
awesome.
in their game right now, which is a lot of fun when we can do it.
It's much easier because sometimes we'll get questions and we're like, well, if we knew the makeup of your team, it would be like, if we know that it's all wizards, that completely changes our answer or our brainstorming. Or we had someone who asked, can you just give me some like Halloween one-shot ideas that we can, so we just got to brainstorm Halloween one-shot ideas. And we were like, tell us if you used any of these. We're really interested to know how you took, we had like Nightmare Factory.
Oh yeah.
With
that
like
was
an
fun.
actual nightmare being trapped, like horse being trapped in the factory, or toys coming to life, or like, what is that? What does that mean? Which
kind of
was
leaning
fun.
on a lot of horror
Yeah.
themes. I would say most of it is I would say pretty heavily kind of D&D oriented as far as the
Mhm.
particular game that they're playing. Although we do definitely get some like indie RPG stuff that kind of gets mixed in there. And then a lot of it is really very story oriented. And that's mostly our responses. That's the way I like to play is I want the game to be really story oriented. I want the play experience to take precedent over the rules experience.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And so a lot of the times that's really where most of our advice starts to really take function. I like having rules. I like having a good boundary, a good space to play in, but rule of fun being a major part of that, or even more specifically like what's going to create the most engagement, right? It's not always what's the best laughter or what's the best goofiness. Like sometimes like we can have somber moments, we can have sad moments, but they should be engaging. All the players at the table should be engaged in the story process.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I just wrote a note to myself to ask whether or not you find that people tend to focus solely on mechanics, or like, the crunchiness of the game, or if you find that a lot of people are more just genuinely interested in like interacting with the fiction and having kind of like these bigger narrative swings.
And that's why we have our Ask a GM section, because those are the like, hey, rules as written says this, but how would you rule this? How would you determine this? And then we get to talk about like, well, if we were going rules as written, we would do this. But like the more fun answer and what we would probably do is this.
Because like I think this is getting into also the ecotone with a therapeutic dimension to games, but because the rules as written is like a matter of interpretation of refereeing, which can be valuable to your point about constraints and what rules do that's pleasurable for play, but also just coming up with batshit crazy ideas, even if they don't accept them, just kind of pokes them to do something differently. Which I always remember from acting, directing class in college of like, just make it green. And it's like, what does that mean? It's like, just do something differently than you did last time. Like the problem is not anything specific that I can articulate. It's just whatever you did last time sucked. So do something new. And I think that can be like a real kick in the pants. And sometimes advice is just, very politely getting someone to get out of a pattern, out of a rut as a GM, as a referee, whether it's a matter of rules or story or whatever. So the water elemental one to me was like a great, like, I could go this.
That's
hilarious.
Reminds me of
Italo Calvino's T = 0. I don't know if you've read it. I think it's his best book. It's actually better than Invisible Cities, but it's about, the original sort of protoplastic sea out of which Luca, the last universal common ancestor, arose. So out of some sort of PNA or RNA universe before DNA was stable. But it's sort of like about, different, and it goes on. And so there's a story about like the first microbes that were like completely enclosed, that had a membrane, that weren't just part of the sea. They weren't just a collection of like floating crap, but they were like things that were separate. They were separate from their sisters. And when they produced a sister, they were then separate from their daughter sisters. And it's like, they're talking to each other, and it was mind blowing. And it's all about like inside of us, like we contain the sea, it's still within ourselves.
Yeah.
And so it's this great sort of story of the evolution of all life on Earth in weird short stories that are very easy to read. But it made me think, like, if a water elemental's in you, you are now you now have a different dimension to yourself.
Right.
That is very it's like physical, it's like, it's not just like, a metaphor. It's like, no, literally,
it could be psychological as well.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But it's mediated by like your blood, like, weird, that's fun.
By your body, by your bodily fluids. Yeah. I imagine like some kind of integration of your own, like the fluids in your cells with the actual elemental, and who knows,
right? You combine, you now have this like combined being. You are two beings.
Well, I think that we determined like rules as written, the water elemental weighs or has a certain amount of volume that you would die from like water poisoning if you tried to drink all of it, or like you couldn't actually drink all of it. And then we were like, rules is fun. Have you ever seen that episode of Futurama where Fry drinks this water guy, and then he has like a water guy in his
right. Oh my God, that's right.
We have to make him cry, and they keep punching him to get him to cry.
That's right. That's the only way to expel him.
Yeah. It's like, he could have been sweating it out, but no, they were like beating the crap out of him.
Faster.
That's great. That's really great. Well, that's again, this is, and tropes and like connecting to others, so inspiring people. So advice can be all these things: inspiration, rules interpretation, just pushing someone to get out of a rut. But how do you do it, since you are the advice givers? I was thinking in real time, how would I give advice? But you actually do it, so please tell us.
Yeah. I think a lot of the times you're exactly right. It is about like, here's a lot of ideas, and you're not going to accept, these aren't all the ideas that you want to do. For me, a lot of times when I'm game mastering, it's really much more about who do I have at the table. I can run a lot of different games. I definitely have like a style to my game mastering, but fundamentally I can play a lot within that range. But I really want to think about like what's going to connect with that player. What's going to connect with that player? Some of that is made up of like class and stuff like that, but so much of it is the person who's sitting there. And so a lot of my conceptualization is I want a lot of different ideas, because I want to think about which one of these is going to be the best connections for the different people at the table. And in reality, when we got started on this, and I was running the Psychology in Seattle podcast and bouncing ideas off with Alyssa, a lot of it was just because I needed another space. I couldn't do it just in my own head, just come up with like, hey, here's what it is. I was way more successful when Alyssa could toss out ideas and I can be like, I don't want to do that idea, but I like this part of that idea.
I get to be his randomizer because I get to go ghost pirates. Have you thought about ghost pirates? And he's like, you know what? I haven't. Ghost pirates are in. Let's do it. What are they looking for? And
Have you considered ghost pirates?
Yeah. She has
like
offered that idea a like weirdly large amount of times though.
But it always works.
Because it works. It's proven. Ghost pirates are proven narrative drivers.
Every time. That's actually the next session podcast. Have you thought about ghost pirates?
I will say pirates fall into
I would wear
like
it on a t-shirt.
Right? Yeah, we should put that on a t-shirt. Pirates fall into a weird space of like, this is a real thing that existed. Pirates like in this concept of pirates was like a real thing that happened in the history of the world. It's sort of amazing
like
to
dinosaurs.
me, just like dinosaurs. Yeah. Like wow.
I think there is quite a
very
difference though, because pirates as we conceptualize them are almost pure fiction, right? Like actual age of piracy was a very short period of time.
Very
like, the cultural representation of pirates is very different. It needs for a lot of open interpretation, which I think is cool. But
yeah, but it often leads out. I mean, this is the beef. We've talked about this before with like pirate genre RPGs. Like, it's not like there was this group of cool rebels living in the Caribbean, not participating in the slave trade one way or the other, doing other cool, fun stuff, robbing from the rich. Like, they weren't Robin Hood guys. They were like, the traditional pirates were like Francis Drake was like a rich British guy defending horrible rich British things against horrible Spanish things. But all of them were horrible. It was two horrible armies fighting each other. And one was doing it like as like sort of state-sponsored terrorism, and the other was just a state army. And then eventually you have a bunch of remainders of this kind of horribleness who, so again, it's like there's nothing good about it, and it leaves out the fact that you're setting it in the midst of the slave trade and then not having that ever be part of the story that I can tell from pirate RPGs is just bonkers. It's like that is the whole story, right, guys? Like that's why all of these shifts are happening. And anyway, so
it's
that's
a lot
the advice I would give.
Or like we think about like paladins or clerics and stuff like that, and all based around like this is like medieval times or the Dark Ages or whatever. But like all that was horrible. Like it was all horrible. And like the context that we put it in is like, oh, this paladin's like standing up for the rights of the people and and like the holy energies and healing people and stuff like that. Like, well, not really.
Magic fixes a lot of things.
Yeah, magic does.
Magic.
Wait, you had a magic
introducing wizards. Colonialism's gone. Don't worry about it.
Yeah, because of magic.
Just get your doubloons.
Well, that's like the classic fantasy trope thing that people say, right? Is like, oh, a wizard did it. Like, don't worry. Like, it's this automatic kind of hand waving thing.
I don't know. God came down and fixed it.
There was
Deus Ex Machina.
Joss Whedon had a term when he was working on, I think it was Buffy, that with writers that they called phlebotonym, and it was basically a term that meant here's a MacGuffin. Here's it's a thing that we don't have to explain that just does the thing that you need it to do for the plot to move forward, but we can't examine it too closely. Like any kind of superhero power is a phlebotonym. Like if we look at it too closely, like obviously it all starts to fall apart because of physics. But like magic is definitely that, or like vampires. Like we can't examine like you're undead, and so like what does that actually mean? Like, does your biological function stop functioning? Are you actually dead? Like, you're animated, which by itself is like a definition of life. Like, do you have blood that moves to muscles and that therefore like allows your body to move? Like, none of it makes any sense. So you just have to sort of phlebotonym this concept and be like, yeah, vampires, and they're moving clearly. So that's good enough.
I always I never run animate skeletons in any game I ever run for like whatever, for D&D, Morkborg, like anything. There's never animate skeletons because that shit drives me crazy. How are their bones still together? How do they have strength? How can they move? It makes no sense to me. It drives me insane, and so I just omit it from games.
I love that it's such a specific pet peeve. It's like mine is like crumbs in the butter drive me nuts. Yours is like animate skeletons.
Mine is animate skeletons.
I love the attention to like the hard speculative fiction of like how would it work, but I will say I just happen to love skeletons. So even though I usually agree with Chris on these, I really love skeletons. And as you've noticed, Ethan loves skeletons. So in Sometimes Kingdom, they're the most common sapient species. So it's like there's skeletons and then there's humans. and then there's everything else. Because whenever a human dies, they become a skeleton with no memories of their previous life. So there just is, it's like a weird game where like there is no permanent death. There's just becoming a different PC of a different species, and thus powers change.
What happens when a skeleton dies?
They become a different skeleton.
Yeah.
It's again, you
They
just
become
like
they become a smaller skeleton.
Oh yeah.
I guess you could be like blown up. I don't know. This are really questions for Ethan, but it's like Chris. That's one where we're like on complete opposite ends. We're very close together on these things, but it's fun to
listen. If your animate skeleton, if your animate fantasy skeleton has like some kind of like ligatures or like even like rotting musculature still holding it together, that's cool. That's fine. But like, don't give me dry bones. That shit's crazy.
What if they had like a clearly like sort of spectral
Goo?
like ligature or something, like
Sure.
there was like a
Yeah.
You can have
that's
magical flesh, just not no flesh.
Magical flesh.
Magical wizard flesh is acceptable.
Yeah.
What is the big slime cube?
Well, yeah, like a
all right,
gelatinous.
let's
let's move on
gelatinous
from my
cube.
specific.
Holding
So we were
from my
talking about
specific pet
advice.
peeve.
No, but I like the theme is kind of like water and like the
That's true,
integument.
yeah.
I just want. I'm just watching. Like, throw down. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Let's do it. But yeah, so are there any examples? Like you mentioned one repeat question asker who has a whole vivid world that you have now theoretically moved parts of around, right? You've helped construct in some way. But do you have other stories like that, or are there reflections on kind of the nature of giving advice, specifically for GMs who are then having fun with their friends, but you don't necessarily know them, or it sounds like you don't really know who they are, right? They really are truly just sort of anonymous caller type question askers. So, I don't know. Have you thought of it differently over the years? Have you learned things? I don't know.
Oh yeah.
stories.
I mean, mostly like a lot of great ideas.
Oh yeah.
Like a lot of the times, our biggest takeaway is this is what an awesome idea.
Oh my God,
this
I wanna
is. Like I
steal
want to
this.
play this game.
Yeah.
And we're big proponents of like when you hear about plot lines, when you watch a movie or something like that, like put that in your game. Like no one's stopping you. There's no copyright issues for you to like play this game with your friends and at a table. Like definitely you should steal it. You should steal any of our ideas. You should
yeah.
steal the latest Pixar movie that you saw. Like put that in your game.
We had a listener who they had like this magical cursed staff, and they were like, what's going to happen when this player has the staff and it starts like the staff is breaking and they don't know? And I was like, oh my God, this is so cool. Like, let's dive into this. And I don't know if they used any of it, but I was like, I'm using that. The other problem with our podcast is that people who use our podcast cannot have their friends listen to the podcast.
Oh yeah.
So what happens is we'll get listeners who go like, hey, if you are in Croatia, do not listen to this podcast. And I have to read that and be like, don't listen if you are in Croatia. Like, our GMs will be like, yeah, sorry, I don't get to tell them, because then if we use your ideas, then they don't get to listen. They have to like listen weeks later after everything's gone down.
Sort of a weird limiting factor for the listener.
Yeah, it kind of does create like a cap on listenership in a way. But I mean, you have the back catalog. People can still, they say that podcasts have a second life in their catalog. So maybe that's where that lives.
That's kind of, and we always do it like a spell or a magic item. So like, and I have that in the title. So it's nice to be able to like look up, oh, have we ever done this? How did we talk about this spell before? And then you have that back catalog to reference, which is helpful. We have our listener in Australia. He had a situation that actually came up where he was running a D&D group for his school, and the school basically said, like, changed hands or something, and basically said, you are devil worshiping and you have to stop this. And so we actually had him on our Oops All Adams episode, because his name is also Adam. And we had Adam Davis on, so it was all Adams and me. I named myself Adam for the day. And we actually got to talk about a real life situation that fit into Adam's wheelhouse there.
Yeah. I think a lot of it, from an advice perspective is this idea that like, I like having the help. I like having the assistants coming up with ideas, and in the process, I think being a game master can sometimes feel like a really lonely experience. And especially in the process of, if you want to make a custom world, a custom campaign, like you're doing a lot of that stuff kind of on your own. And what's extra hard about that is it's not the same as being a writer. You know, if I'm writing my own world, I'm doing every single piece, but I'm doing a weird mix of like I'm designing something that is a presentation to then hand to other people, and then we're all going to play and build from that perspective, and the players have just as much opportunity to break that or interact with it the way that I wanted, or go a whole new direction that's exciting for all of us. And I think that, you know, the basic concept of having something like an advice show is to say, like, hey, you're not alone. Like you have other people that are out there that can be helping with the planning process, that you can chat with about this, because eventually what you get to at the end is like, you ran a campaign and hopefully it went amazing and everybody had a great time, but how many ideas did you toss out? And how many things did you kind of have to cycle through or sort through before you actually got to the end result, which was, here's what we actually did in the game? And I think that's a very interesting process.
There is so much pressure now too, with a lot of like a resurgence in actual play podcasts out there. People go like, I want to be Matt Mercer. It's like, you're not going to be Matt Mercer.
You can't, not everybody's Matt Mercer, not everybody's Brennan Mulligan. And I also think that, like, that is a very specific mode of, how do I want to say this? It's a very specific mode of, like, communicating the medium, right? It's like, that is for consumption. And I kind of have, like, a bit of a nit to pick with actual play for that reason. It's changed the, like, overall expectations of the landscape, where everything has to be this, like, highly produced, polished kind of thing, as opposed to what you were saying, Adam, which is more of just an inherently collaborative story, you know, that you bring to the table, and maybe it gets broken, maybe not, but you can't. That's a tough expectation to put on yourself.
There's just different things. As I really, really enjoy the solo planning dimensions. But obviously now, especially since doing it as a business, I'm also thinking of it in terms of, you know, eventually does this get into the world in some way? But in the moment, I mean, that's actually usually ex post facto. In the moment, it isn't pleasurable still to just GM and make stuff up on the spot. I don't tend to plan a lot. And it's more, you know, using stuff that happens in the game later to build a product or think back through it. But it is a different pleasure doing that with friends and trying to achieve the equivalent of, like, a really fun police procedural, which if someone else watched would be kind of hokey, but because it's very tropey and melodramatic, because you only have 2 hours or 3 hours, and, you know, people are rushing and in and out and they don't remember. But in the moment, it feels very lived and true and authentic because you've heightened all the emotions. So it's a different, you know what I mean? Whereas prestige TV is very subtle, or like an Oscar movie, you know, is like very subtle. But that's because you're dwelling with it. You know, it's very highly produced. A bunch of people have spent tons of time, and you're not, you know, most of us, right, are not inhabiting those games the same way. We're not acting at the same level. We don't plan as much, or frankly care as much. Some of the fun is the randomness of, okay, my friends and I are going to hang out at the end of the week and play a game. Yeah, I'll come up. Yeah, I have a vague idea, some alien attacks, and it'll be great. The alien's actually, giving birth. And it's not that bad. It's just freaking out, you know, whatever. And so you have some vague idea and it plays out and it's fun. Whereas producing a season with character arcs that are cathartic is a lot more work, and it's a different thing. And it doesn't mean that one is bad. It's just kind of marking on the difference. And it's helped me, like, the pandemic helped me to embrace, like, shitty TV, like watching not just police procedurals, which I always kind of enjoy because of the plotting, but like Bravo level TV, which I used to, like, despise just because, you know, it was on. My wife and I were, like, trapped inside. Because, you know, sometimes it is, like, taxing to watch really good prestige TV, and it raises your, you know, it causes anxiety in you. You're, like, mirroring the anxiety of these humans realistically going through horrible shit. And I think, you know, sometimes
Severance
you do
spikes my cortisol.
Exactly. Severance is a great idea. It's probably the best show, you know, it's the best show on TV, but it is like, it's an event where every week it's like, okay, are we ready? All right, let's watch it. As opposed to, okay, just put on anything that's going to be cathartic. And I think RPGs can serve both functions, and it's not right or wrong. I personally like the prestige stuff too. And I think I've achieved that as a GM, and definitely have listened to some of it as a listener of AP, but it is not the norm. Do you know what I mean? Like, it would be very odd. It's like a very small percentage. I think most of D&D is probably does not achieve the police procedural. But it's, you know, most GMs are not doing it kind of for a living, right? Most of it is probably much on the level of Scooby-Doo or like SpongeBob, you know, just kind of random. Yeah. And that's fun too. And so there's a kind of, you know, there's like different overlapping genres of kind of exogenous, like, expectation around, like, how wacky am I going to be? How much do I prep? And I imagine, so all to say, to bring it back to next session, there's probably different advice depending on if someone was calling in and being like, I'm a producer whose name rhymes with Schmersher of a highly produced AP, like that's going to be different than like
Yeah.
home
As
GM
far as
who's
I
like,
know, Matt Mercer has not asked for our advice.
Yeah, I mean, he
Yet.
could be
You
using a different name.
We
so
don't
I
know.
Yeah, you haven't
I-
haven't gotten any submissions from Pat Purser or
Schmat. It's always Schmat.
We did have that
for me.
Schmat guy on.
yeah.
That was
Number one Schmat.
Yeah.
Wait a
Yeah, I remember
second.
him.
You go back and listen to Critical Role, and you're like, "You son of a bitch!"
God
that was
damn it.
those right. All right.
That would have been
Didn't even give us a plug.
that would have been really cool, actually.
Yeah. Actually, it's interesting because I think you're absolutely right, Chris, and I think that it's an interesting effect that has happened over the evolution and the repopularization of D&D or role-playing games, I should say, in general. That I don't think, like, even Matt Mercer and Brendan Lee Mulligan have made statements to say that this isn't how everybody should play. There's not really a wrong way to play the way that's fun for the people at your table. Like, what we're doing is a show. We're trying to make this entertaining for the people who are watching, not just the people who are sitting and playing at the table. And that is a different experience than the kind of game that you might run, with your friends. And it doesn't have to look like this. Which I just think is very interesting, that even though they've tried to be vocal about that, you still get a kind of subset of people that are like, I'm trying to run a Matt Mercer game.
Well, I mean, I think
that's interesting.
That has the resurgence of RPGs goes hand in hand with the explosion of actual play. Like that's something that we've kind of talked a lot on this show, and like AP people have specifically brought up. So it does make sense that, like, if this is your introduction to Dungeons and Dragons or to tabletop role playing games in general, then that's going to set the tone for how you move forward with it.
Yeah. And I think it's fair to say there are. I'm a strong believer as a professional writer and now game designer that there are better and worse ways to do certain things some of the time. But it's painting with a broad brush, right? You don't want to say there's like an absolute right way to GM in Toto. I mean, that would be crazy. And you want to be welcoming and get people into the hobby. And it is, like I said, it's genuinely fun sometimes to not have anything planned, and it's just some friends, and it's just very silly, and that's totally fun and fair. So I think it's probably, I'm guessing, to summarize some of this, it's responding to the needs of the question asker and trying to suss out, like, what are they going for? How much time are they putting into this? Sort of what's the intent, right? And that it'll sort of scale with their intent, how you're offering advice. And maybe, like you said, you have these return question askers. And I think that's really fascinating to think of developing a relationship through kind of a neutral third party, again, turning to therapy, more like a therapist, where you're not really saying, it's like, look, it's your life, you're going to make choices. I'm just kind of mirroring back, what I'm hearing. I'm presenting alternatives, and you can kind of sift through them, and you have agency. So, I mean, that brings me to therapy, which I think is not something, we had set out to do with Why We Roll. Although if people use it for therapy, please tell us. Come to social media.
We'll only charge $100 an hour instead of $150.
That's a good rate.
That's a good rate. Yeah,
it's a good rate. It's a good rate, baby.
But yeah, so like I think for me, D&D type games are always about story first and fun, but secondarily kind of political propaganda, right? And like imagining worlds otherwise, like which all to me just all science fiction does, all speculative fiction more broadly can do. Although a lot of fantasy is crazy revanchist right-wing nonsense, but it all can be liberatory. But I think it's interesting to think of it in terms of therapy. That's not something I thought about, but it makes total sense. And I think the idea of working with people with different neuro backgrounds and people who just have different ideas about socializing, maybe would benefit from the constraint, the sort of formal constraint of like, now you're pretending to be an elf. So whatever you do, well, it's on that pretend elf. It's not you. So there's a kind of freedom in the distance, right? Or something. So I wonder that's all just to say in a kind of vague way. And I don't know, Chris, if you want to build on that, but just, Adam and Alyssa, like, how do you see games as functioning in therapy? How has it worked in practice? I shouldn't say, how do you see it? How has it worked? Because you've done it, right? So it does work.
I defer to Adam on all of this.
I'm just curious. This is a really interesting topic,
So actually, what you're talking about is a concept that we kind of gave a terminology to that's kind of used in drama therapy a little bit, but it's called aesthetic distance, and it's basically the term actually comes from it was a French poet who was like on a steamship at a time where like sailing through the Atlantic was dangerous because of things like icebergs and stuff you could run into. And there was a fog that was in the distance. And he described the fog as being far enough away that he could appreciate the beauty of it, but not so close that it was dangerous, that it felt like it was causing a sense of danger. And so the aesthetic distance between you and your character is actually a playable and usable resource, especially from a therapeutic standpoint. And I think game masters do this all the time, even without thinking about it. But as a therapeutic resource, it's used a lot to either create more distance between you and your character, or to create less distance and allow you to have like a sense of like ownership, or a sense of like, this is happening to me. And you can do it even in like the same sentence. You can do it in the same space. The power of it is tremendous, to be like, oh wow, your character is fumbling through this roll to 1 and is like tumbling down the stairs, and they're having like a super hard time, and this was the 3rd one in a row, and boy, like it's all like comedy of errors. But you get yourself up and brush yourself off and get right back to it. And like, even in that like small segment, you get the opportunity to be like, oh, my character's making mistakes, having a hard time doing things, even owning my challenges. Your character, you've made a decision that like you don't know what to do, and you're frozen by indecision. Your character is like standing there frozen by indecision. And even though the player may be owning this anxiety or this feeling that's happening in the moment, I'm giving it to the character. I'm going to let the character have this experience, and then I get to say, oh, they finally like compose themselves, and they're ready to jump into the battle, or ready to negotiate with the shopkeeper. And now I get to say, you finally compose yourself. You're ready to jump in. You're ready to. I'm talking with this shopkeeper. And now the successes get to be owned by you, and the challenges get to be owned by your character. And that aspect of aesthetic distance is so powerful. And I would say like, there's even like, we could get into this like broader discussion of like a meta that comes along with that. There's like the roles at the table conversation of like, who are you at the table? There's your characters that in an experience. There's players that are playing those characters. There's people who are sitting at a table playing a game. Like there's a whole kind of up and down process by that. But aesthetic distance becomes this really, really powerful concept in the application of this as a therapeutic intervention.
You should talk about the kid with the knees.
Oh yeah. We once had early on in
the kid with the knees.
Kid
that
with
one
the knees.
kid.
Yeah, just the introduction was like,
yeah.
He knew it.
Weirdly, the only kid that we had that we ever had that had knees. It was it was a very strange, narrow subset of population.
This is our podcast in a nutshell, by the way.
We had a player who was I think in middle school, high school, somewhere around that kind of age, and very, very quiet. Really struggled to speak up. Really struggled to make even like say things above a whisper. But was also super tall, especially for their age, and kind of like very skinny. And they would sit at their desk, even in school. And we got this kind of download from the parents. They would sit at their desk even in school and like hold their knees up to their chest, in these like little school desks, and just so closed up. So like their whole body language, all their affectation was like closed up and so scared to be a part of the world. And they came and they were picking out characters to start playing in the game, and they picked a dwarf barbarian as their kind of like starting character. And interestingly, the characters at that point in time, we were kind of giving the characters personalities as a way for them to start. We eventually learned that we wanted the players to completely imbue that and make those decisions for themselves. But at that time, that particular character was actually like very like solemn and very stoic, was how the character was written. And they didn't do any of that. They were like, I'm a dwarf barbarian. I'm loud. I demand my space. I like take up space. And Adam Davis was running this table. And at one point in time, they were in a like ballroom of some sort of royal party. And they all had to like be their characters and actually sit at the table their way the characters were sitting. And Adam Davis goes like, "How is your character sitting right now? What are they doing? Like, show me with your body. Like, what does this look like?" And so he like had his legs come down, and he kind of sat up and like did this, and like everybody at all the NPCs in this party all responded because they were supposed to be dignitaries. slaves. They were like from a neighboring kingdom, or like posing as that. And so everybody here who were like trying to gain favor with royalty, they were like, oh, I got to copy whatever it is that they're doing. And so, this player to sit and like started pounding on the table and be like, I demand more bread, and started like actually like taking on this personality of this thing. And like all the other NPCs, as Adam would describe them, would go like, yes, we also demand bread. Like, look, that's right. We there should be more bread at this table. And like got to like really respond and make it clearly so successful for this kid to do it. And by the time that the kid, this was many sessions into like a whole plot line, but they really like got a chance to speak up a little bit more, to demand some space, to find their voice, and even as a player at the table, they would suddenly start like talking at a regular volume and stop sitting at in their desk with their knees up and taking up a little, getting more comfortable with the amount of space that they took up, which was fantastic.
That's amazing.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
I will say, I will always remember my first D&D character, which was a dwarf cleric. So I feel like, picking a dwarf is a good way to start D&D, because you get to really just like that Gimli shit, just like being loud and brazen. And I love that opened up that space for them to be more open to the world. That's a really beautiful story. And it speaks a lot to just like lead you see from the table to real life as well. Like this is something that my partner, who is on a bunch of actual play stuff, and I talk about, where it's like, sometimes the character does come back into your real life, and you kind of like have these moments where you're like, oh, what would, in Jen's case, what would Viv do in this moment? And kind of like using that as like a guide stone to make action, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I think it relates to the concept of we're all like in performance studies and in overlapping with gender studies, et cetera. Like we're all performing roles, and becoming aware of those socially, those ways in which you are or not performing to different people's expectations, allows you to just make choices about them, as opposed to not, if you didn't know what you're doing and how it's being received, you don't have as much agency there. But on a kind of deeper, more philosophical level, like coming from a Buddhist tradition, like you're stripping away the veils of illusion that there is some sort of eternal self that has to be, there. I'm not saying you're going to play D&D once and experience complete ego death. It's more just like to that point you're raising about Jen and the kid. It's like you can kind of go through different motions and realize like, oh yeah, like there's no reason I couldn't sit differently or speak in a different voice, or just it allows you to try stuff out in a relaxed way, often with friends, hopefully with friends. And I think there is something therapeutic to that, even if you're not, in therapy in it as such, right? I think there's something therapeutic to just trying on personas, trying out weird moralities and weird social systems that you don't necessarily agree with from a logical standpoint. And then maybe you're like, you know what? Well, I'm not going to be chaotic evil in real life, but like you got it out. I see that more with video games. I feel like where people just kill every single NPC, but then in real life they're very sweet, and you're like, what is wrong with you?
It's interestingly, Adam Davis. I would like run these personal games, and Adam Davis tortured, just brutally abused all the NPCs that I would make. I'd make NPCs and I'd put them in the game. And Adam Davis is like one of the most like caring, wonderful people I've ever met. And like I'd put NPCs in, and he would he'd like charm them, and then like brutally just like berate them and be like, I don't want you standing next to me. I want you to stand over there, far away from me. I don't want to be near you right now. And they'd be like, okay, of course. Why would you want to stand next to me? I'll stand. Don't worry, I'll stand over here. Can you still see me? Yeah, I can still see you. Move around to the other side of that door. I don't want to see you. He would just be so mean to them.
Another sci-fi book, I think I might have mentioned this in past, but Kim Bo-young is a famous Korean sci-fi writer who has a very famous novella that's about sort of it's sci-fi about these aliens who go to Earth and stuff, but it's very clearly about Buddhism and kind of the idea of like going through cycles of reincarnation where sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad, and there's the one sort of the godlike being who's always living through the worst possible things over and over again on Earth, and all the other sort of godlike beings are like, why do you do that? Like in my, I always go in and I'm like a rich guy, and the kind of main character is saying, no, that it's through suffering that you grow. And I think the point of the story by the end, it's a novella, but is that, you would need you'd kind of want to experience both. Like if you're just only ever suffering, you're also kind of like limiting yourself in a certain way. But I definitely think I almost wonder if it tracks with like how nice someone is IRL with how weird they get in games. As soon as they have that freedom, that to your point, the aesthetic distance to just go ham, and they're like, yeah, I'm gonna rip off all his fingernails. And you're like, you're haggling over 5 gold worth of
this is not worth it, brother.
Yeah.
I'm gonna use my 9th level spell slot, and you're like,
what?
really?
You're like, I'm gonna Project Gladio this whole nation because this guy cheaped me out of 5 gold for the oats, you know,
unacceptable. No one will ever do it again.
God.
So on that brutal note, so I mean, I guess so we've covered a lot. It's been about an hour, so just, you know, it's in terms of time.
Sure.
I you know, we have a couple people in the chat. I don't know if you all have any questions. But also, Chris, if you had any questions, and this might be an interesting one. We didn't talk about this ahead of time, so not to put you on the spot, but anything you'd want advice on, since we have advice people.
Oh no!
Yeah.
Oh my God! Oh wow!
I'm
yeah,
ready.
I'm
ready. Chris.
What would I want advice on? Okay, say you have in 5th edition D&D, say you have a tiefling and they eat a fire elemental. What would happen?
So this is a.
I'm just bringing it back to the elementals.
Yeah.
Do you want a rules as written? Oh no.
Well, we'd have to look up some stuff.
I think we want both, right? We want both levels.
Yeah.
Tieflings are immune to fire, right?
They have
Like it's
fire
not going to
resistance.
burn on the way down.
Oh, they're
And
fine
then
then. Oh.
They have resistance. They would still be.
How large is a fire elemental?
They're pretty big.
But
you know, fire is also really interesting because it's you know it's this
combusts, it burns.
Right. Is the fire elemental defined by, like, does it have a fuel source, or is it just the fire? Which is a really interesting sort of just philosophical question. Of we got into the same thing when we went into the water elemental, where we're like, well, water elementals have this size, you know, they're large size creatures, but like theoretically they're still leaking water everywhere. Like
where does the water generate from?
Right. And also, like, if you reduce them in size, like, is it still a water elemental? There's like a really interesting
it becomes a steam elemental if you squish it under enough pressure.
Right. Yeah, there you go. Like, does it change to a new kind of elemental? If there's a fire elemental and a water elemental and they're, you know,
I'm imagining calcifer
having a good time together. Like, is that
calcifer?
Is that
I'm like swallow the heart, calcifer.
So they have to have some kind of core, right?
It was an ash elemental.
And do tieflings have fire for blood? I don't know.
Yeah.
So we do
also a really interesting question.
We do have one question comment from the chat. So Taylor, hey Taylor.
Hey Taylor.
Hi Taylor.
Thinking about TTRPG and physicality and how much playing in a digital space makes that much harder to embody. To sort of formulate as a question, how you know, do you? That's always a good one, and we've had a lot of interesting discussions about that too. Like, you know, do people play? When I was a kid, you played in someone's basement or whatever with pen and paper D&D. Now I play most of the time, more or less professionally, through Discord. Mm-hmm. So it's very different in that sense. In another sense, it's not different at all, and I kind of forget about that difference. But like, especially with therapy or something like that. How do you address those differences? I don't know.
So I think so as a game master, I use my body a lot to describe and to emphasize the stuff that's going on. I don't know if you've noticed on our stream, but I'm like gesturing so much that poor Liz is having
you do like to gesticulate. Yeah,
I do. I love it.
He hits his mic all the time.
I do. I even when I'm in therapy, like I do a lot of virtual therapy, and I'm like constantly hitting my mic, and I go, "Oh, sorry." But the process, I even like describe stuff like I'll be like, you're going down a long hallway, and Adam Davis has made this observation that I'll like surprise myself by like what my hands are doing as the description of what's happening. Like there's a long hallway and there's a room to your left. Oh, look at that! And up above you is a chandelier. like I my hands are doing their own thing, and then that's like part of where my improvisational style comes from. But because I use my body a lot, there's a lot of like little classroom tricks that are fantastic to use at a table. And I think these are great even when working with adults. You know, you get your range, especially when you're working with kids, you see more extremes in this. But, you know, I'll have like a quiet kid at the table and then a louder kid, and I will sit the quiet kid next to me so that when we're all talking and we're all, you know, having a fun time, but I also can like lean in real close and listen to what my quieter player is trying to tell me, and I can be like, oh, hold on, everyone. And then I'll lower my own voice and I'll lower my own body, ready to receive, ready to be on the same level as the quiet kid. And then I'll bring myself back up and repeat what they said and like give them a louder voice, or have them repeat it to everyone else. Like, oh yeah, that's a great idea. You should say that out loud to the whole table.
But you can't do that online.
All that stuff.
Those are
harder to do online.
You can use a separate chat.
Okay.
You can.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. Is like there's supplementary tools, but it's not the same like physicality of being in the space.
And a part of it is like, I'm not just, when I'm doing it physically, I'm not just doing it for that player. I'm doing it for everyone else to see what I'm doing for that player. So some of the stuff that you lose out on when you're in the digital space is not just my ability to use my body that way, but it's all this little subtle clues. Like I can have an individual chat with a player and they'd be like, oh yeah, you should totally say that in the chat for the whole group, or you should say that out loud. But what the other players don't see is me doing that. So like when I do it physically, they all see me pause the game. They all see me say, oh, everybody hold on a second. And then they see me come down. They see all that happen. And that's important too, in them being able to recognize, so that they can start doing that too. They can start having that space and like seeing, oh, they want to talk. I'll give them some space to talk. And recognizing why that's important. So I do think that there are things that you lose. I also think there are things that you gain. I have a soundboard here that has a bunch of like really fun buttons. I made a button just for that. That I already had ready.
The ability to mute everybody at once, pretty handy.
Yeah.
Cool.
I think being able to pull up, I love tools like Albert Rodeo or like Roll20, like mapping tools and things like that. I think are super fun to use in different ways. I love being able to easily pull up pictures, being able to easily reference rules. I love digital resources for a lot of that stuff. So there are some distinct advantages to, I have a computer, I have a lot of tools at my disposal, and not just me, but like a lot of my players do too. Like they have the ability to jump in and utilize many of these things. And I think that's fantastic as well.
Not only that, but trying to get a game together in your 30s with kids, and the ability to be like, oh, we can all meet, but we're all in our own houses, and, not have to all try to get together, because that will never happen.
Yeah. I often say the absolute hardest part of any role-playing game is scheduling.
Yep.
Yeah, for real.
That's
the real
the
final boss.
hardest.
Yeah.
The hardest part of being a GM is just administrating.
And in that sense, you win. You won the finite game of RPGs if you had fun with your friends. If
you did it.
That's true.
There you go.
We all win.
The only way to win is to play.
That's right. It's the opposite of war games. Oh, that's so amazing, Alyssa. The opposite way to win is we should make T-shirts or something.
Done.
Yeah.
Cross collab T-shirts.
Did I answer the question? I kind of forgot what the question was, so I can't remember. I
think I mean, Taylor was musing about just the lack of physicality in digital space, and it makes it harder to embody a character maybe for them. To your point, there's a lot of great tools out there, but it's also just like individual preference is wildly different in this regard as well.
And playing with people is fun, and I in no way mean to knock that. It is more to the point you're raising about reality and scheduling. And for us, something that we've got in the cadence of in the last couple of years is like going to conventions for 4 days and playing a lot with people in person, and then back to Discord. And they're just different because in a weird way, I know the people on Discord so well, and I don't know the strangers at all. And they're both fun, and they're just very different energies. And there's different sort of timelines and sort of energy in terms of like, okay, you got to like make something happen. But I will say as an aside, I mean, the whispering people, whether in real life or with a note in real life, or just, it's actually easier online, I would say, with Discord. You just DM someone, hey, I shoot that person while they're not looking. It is really funny and effective. And it works. It does work well to kind of set up A plots, B plots. It's hard to juggle them in real time if you miss a message though. But if you're kind of aware that someone's going to do it. Yeah. One last question. Okay, so I think maybe this will be the last one, and we'll let you go if y'all have another few minutes.
I don't know. This has been a lot of fun.
Yeah.
We like
Yeah,
hanging out with you
time.
guys.
Well,
Yeah,
in the chat,
we like
That's pretty good.
Because we're on the West Coast, we're actually from the past.
Oh yeah.
And you're in
Oh,
the
that's
future.
right. That's
Ah,
right. Yeah,
it's
you're-
true. We are in the future.
We've got like 3 hours to make up.
You're like a whole light second behind us or something.
Yeah.
So Logos says, how about creeping imposter syndrome as a GM? So this one I definitely hear, I feel like all the time too, not
Yeah.
feeling like you're really good enough in some, whatever it is, you're not sure how to really, you understand, or you don't know what to do. Even if, and it's hard because you can know rationally that, right, like I'm allowed to do whatever I want. It's about having fun. But yeah, exactly. You've listened to the APGMs, you've whatever expectations for yourself. And sometimes, because I'm a perfectionist, so I can definitely identify with others who just have that idea of like, I need to do it right. You know what I mean? So what advice do you give for imposter syndrome?
I have such a hard time with that because I'm married to a professional dungeon master. And then when I was going to run my first game and I was like, I can't do it. I'd bounce stuff off him and be like, pretend you don't know that this is going to happen because I don't know what I'm doing.
How did you deal with the imposter syndrome?
Me personally, I write a lot of lists. I am a list person, and I would research a bunch of things that would help me with that. And then when we would actually play, and I realized that I was improving and like all of my lists and prep were going out the window, that kind of helped me go like, oh, okay, never mind.
Yeah, you sort of took that kind of nervous energy and put it into like planning and
I put it somewhere and then that's
yeah.
where it went, and then it was fine for me personally. But
well, I think that's also interesting because like making the list is still productive even if you end up leaning heavily on improv because you have, you've captured all of these ideas somewhere, right? And act writing makes it easier to remember all that good stuff. So it's still informative even if it's to the side.
When the teacher lets you have 1 page of notes and you write all the notes really small and then you realize, oh, I learned more because I forced myself to write all the notes. That's what I do.
I'd say that like a lot of the stuff that I try to remind myself for is what the goal really is. Especially when I'm GMing with a group of friends, with a group of people that I know and that I trust and I enjoy spending time with even when we're not playing role-playing games. Being able to remember like we're all just trying to have a fun time. Like yes, there's some extra responsibility that gets put on the game master in some of the setup and the planning and the organization, and sometimes those are things that I love about being a game master. But I also recognize that the real goal here is for us to all have fun, and I get to choose how vulnerable I can be with my players, with the people at the table. It's okay for me to say like, oh, I didn't really plan for this, or I don't really know what that rule is. There's sometimes an expectation as a game master that like you have to know everything, and it's all got to be from the veil of like, yes, you've clearly played exactly into my plot. Like, no, you can. No one cares. Like, they're all there
according
having a
to plan.
time. You can be like, yeah, wow, you guys broke through a wall in the castle. I don't know what's on the other side of that wall. Let's come up with something. How about it's a storeroom? Cool, you guys are in the storeroom now. Like, feel free. They're your friends. They're there at the table having a good time with you. And even when you're running with strangers, like I've had the experience of GMing for lots of people that like they're generally okay. It's all playful, and they're ready to kind of jump in and be a part of that experience. And if you can be just a vulnerable in that way and kind of let them a little bit behind the screen, a lot of times people will be very supportive from being able to jump into that. And the rest of it will come with experience. I was nervous to GM for like 4 years. From being a since I started in grad school. I think I did 4 years, and that was running groups, multiple groups every week, and I was still nervous every single time before I sat down to GM. And it was I just had to sort of power through that and get to the playful part. And it wasn't until I was many years into playing many games per week that finally I was like, okay, this is not a big deal. But I had to kind of give myself a lot of reassurance of like, I'm very improv heavy, and I'm going to roll with whatever punches anybody could possibly play in there.
Especially when you have the master of Adam Davis trying to break everything.
Adam Davis would constantly try to break everything.
Well, there you go. He was trial by fire, right?
He's
got
your
to
he
make
was
heckler.
the
setting it up. Yeah.
You need
I do have a toxic counterpoint to this, which is Logos. If players make you feel inadequate as a GM, punish them.
Well, I was going to say
that's not real
maybe-
advice, but
Actually, this is one of the things I'm always a big proponent of. Like, talk with your players at your table.
Yeah.
There are circumstances. This was I don't know if we still have time to talk about it.
Go for it.
I used to go to all these gaming game master were they like panels at cons. So you go to like PAX or comic conventions, and oftentimes they'd have like a whole panel of game masters. And one of my biggest gripes was oftentimes there'd be like a player that come up to the mic and they would say, I have this one player at the table and they're like not engaging, and they're like on their phone, and pretty much universally the answers were like, kick them out of your table, they don't deserve to be there. And I hated how often that advice was tossed out. And there are times where this is a toxic person, you're not very close with each other, they're really having an impact on the game. Absolutely, you should be ready and recognize that there are times where that's necessary. But so often the problem can be fixed by like, have a conversation with them.
Communicate.
Sit down and talk with them, right? Like,
I also think like to go back
do
to
what the game is.
agency, like, you can get the whole table in, and that's we try to write this in more like Tony Grasso of Blister Critters. He had a big point about this, about like collectively building worlds. So it's gonna big him up for what you were just saying for the first answer. But the second part about toxic players or people who make you feel less, I mean, to some degree that should be a table issue. It's not you and the player, because that's that oppositional hub and spoke model that I think it's not just like weird and not as fun, it's also not good storytelling in that it is a collective collaborative story. And so if you're always you're doing a story thing as the director or whatever, and they're acting, and then you turn to someone else, then you're kind of having a strange, different experience that isn't the same as forging a collective kind of vision and a collective world building and a collective whatever. So it should be a collective response too, because that happens like sometimes even just at conventions. The most common thing is the sort of dominant players will speak a lot. And then even especially if you have just quieter players, newer players, or little kids, right? There'll be little kids who just feel like adults are talking. It's all going very fast. They're a little overwhelmed. There's 80,000 people at PAX or whatever. It's like, it's important to like remind people that like, hey, there's a kid there, but it's really nice when you don't have to be the one doing it, because you don't know that these aren't your friends. So it's like they're all friendly, but it's nice when the person next to them is like, hey buddy, can you like let the kid next to you like say something? And he's I'm sorry. Usually people just aren't aware, right? They're excited, they're not. I would, in my experience, 9 times out of 10
blinders.
They're just kind of doing their thing. They're like, I want to be a chaos goblin, I'm gonna yell some stuff. So don't have to kick him out, but could kick. I guess that's kind of that's the extreme, right? Of any.
Yeah, well, I think to Adam's point, you can always start with a conversation at the table, and then make a decision from there.
Yeah. Well, should we kick ourselves out of this podcast?
We're all done. I don't have a kick us out or like door slam.
You gotta get a
tromboner.
Love it.
Yeah. All right. Well, can we get a budget for a soundboard? Like, is this a? We'll talk about it later.
The whole table is toxic, says Taylor. So on that note, Chris, your last question as always.
Yeah, my last question is always, Alyssa, Adam, where can we find you? Where can we find the Next Session podcast? How can we best support y'all?
Oh, wonderful. We have a whole, at the end of our podcast, spiel that usually I read. So I can tell you that we are at nextsessionpodcast.com. That's where you can find all of our episodes. And that's where you can submit your own questions. So Taylor, if you have any more questions for us, please submit a question. And if we always say, if we read your question on our podcast, which we generally will, we'll send you a sticker if you want a sticker.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's nice.
You can also find us on Instagram at Next Session Podcast, on Facebook at The Next Session, and on Blue Sky at Next Session.
And I will tell you, I don't really know how to Blue Sky.
Yeah.
We're there. I don't know how to do
If you
it.
send us a message, we will We'll find it.
I'll find it.
You'll
I
see
will
it.
respond.
Yeah.
I don't like. I think I follow one person. I don't really know how to blue sky.
I also, as always, like to invite people to come and join the Discord,
Mhm.
which you can find on our website, and you can send us a message and chat with us in the Potteration Discord if you want to do so. So you can find that link on our website at Next Session Podcast.
But mostly questions
Oh,
fuel
yeah.
our podcast. So any question you got, feel free.
Yeah.
We'd love to answer it on our podcast.
Nice. I'll noodle some questions for you.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it.
I'm gonna
It'll be
write them
from
as Schmeich.
Skrish Peckett.
Exactly.
We don't
Christian
know who this
Schmeich.
Yeah,
is.
who,
We'll
who
ask
could
you a
that
bunch of
be?
Yeah, if you get a message from Reese Rickett, you'll know who it is.
Oh, there you
Perfect.
go.
Yeah.
There you go.
Like Reese is so weird.
I was going
Reese
Welsh. I don't know, man. Riss.
Yeah.
Reese is very
How do you
popular
pronounce
right now.
that? I don't know. There you go. See, I'm ahead of the curve on naming babies.
We're
There
gonna
you
we'll
go.
find out. We're gonna write a table and roll on that table.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that's why we roll. Sometimes it's to I don't know, give each other advice. I think it's sometimes it's therapeutic. That's the takeaway, right? Why we roll?
Yeah.
It's therapeutic.
love it.
Can be, and it's a lot of fun. So thank you, Adam and Alyssa Johns, hosts of the Next Session podcast. Everyone check out the Next Session podcast and ask some questions. If you're, GMing or playing and, have questions. They need questions to do the podcast.
It's a necessary part of the podcast.
Yeah.
And you should give a listen to all of the wonderful gaming shows on the Potteration Network, which we are a part, as well as the Next Session podcast.
Very nice.
That's right.
There you go.
Yeah.
Good applause.
All
Thanks
right.
so much for having us on.
Thank you so
guys.
much.
This is a
Yeah,
blast.
appreciate
you.
y'all. All right.
Solidarity.
Well, that's it for Why We Roll. We're here on the internet, and we will see be in your ears again soon. I don't know.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's our
Click an
closing
end
music.
screen.
Get out of
Click
here.
an end screen.